With the end of World War I, it seemed to be an end to an age of chaos. In fact, the world was simply setting the stage for a new set of problems coming up down the road. Desperate times are to come which will lead to extreme measures and beliefs, and it all starts with the Great Depression. Factors that led up to the Great Depression are an uneven distribution of wealth, overproduction of goods, and a decreasing demand for goods. The working classes didn't have enough money to buy the products they made. Factories and farms were producing too many goods. Banks foreclosed many farms, and when failing factories and farms cut back on jobs, people lost their jobs and bought even fewer goods. These events were a vicious cycle causing the Wall Street crash of 1929, the start of the Great Depression. This event had devastating and deep impacts socially, economically, and psychologically. Economically, the standard of living went down as the majority of Americans were in debt, jobless, homeless, and lost everything they had. Businesses, banks, and the stock market completely failed and collapsed. Psychologically, people were devastated, with many people committing suicide and families torn apart. Society changed, with people forced to create homes out of trash, dubbed Hoovervilles or shanty towns, and a homeless coast established where certain signs meant centers that were giving away food and clothing. Backed into a corner and scraping by, Americans were forced to adapt. This wasn't domestic either, becoming global as American banks removed loans and investments from Europe. World trade dropped significantly as the U.S. increased taxes on imports to improve homeland companies, a practice other countries followed. Bank failures led to financial crisis, especially in Central Europe. Furthermore, Germany had borrowed money from America to pay off their war debt, who were in trouble once more. This time, Germany responded by making more money, but that simply led to inflation and further failing in the economy. Britain increased taxes and regulated currency in order to stop inflation, while France tried to fight unemployment with increased worker pay and benefits. Unfortunately, unemployment remained high. Other European socialist governments responded with cooperative recovery programs. America's solution was through President Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt passed the New Deal, a program meant to address the Great Depression. It provided government jobs for the unemployed, recovery in terms of economic growth, and reform through the regulation of Wall Street and banks. Programs meant to help included Social Security, programs giving loans to businesses, programs that built large public work projects to give people jobs, and regulation of banks, some of which still exist today. Politically, this meant throwing out laissez-faire. Economically, Roosevelt's actions improved the economy rapidly from 1933 to 1937, but then fell down into a deep recession. Arguably, it was the Second World War that pulled countries out of the Great Depression. As a response to the world crisis, there is a rise of fascism. The most prominent one is Nazi Germany under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. With his rise, democracy is dissolved in Germany and Hitler rises to power as a dictator. He re-established Germany's military, a violation of the Treaty of Versailles, an action the League of Nations ignored. Many countries felt sympathy towards Germany for being held and the war debt of World War I, so no country stood up as Germany once again rose to power. Italy, under Benito Mussolini, became Germany's close ally and adopted a similar fascist mindset. All these variables are components leading up to World War II. As fascist aggression persisted, Allied responses were minimal to non-existent. Italy invaded Ethiopia because Mussolini wanted to expand the Italian Empire. In Asia, Japan attacked China and Korea, as the Allied nations looked on, Hitler took the chance to regain the land Germany lost due to the Treaty of Versailles. He took back Rhineland, followed by Austria, and through the Munich Agreement with the Prime Minister of Britain, Neville Chamberlain, part of Czechoslovakia, Sudetenland. Hitler broke the agreement, taking the rest of Czechoslovakia. No military action was taken, but Neville Chamberlain warned Hitler if he invaded Poland, France and Britain would wage war on Germany. Nevertheless, Germany still invaded Poland, whereafter war was declared as promised. Appeasement failed and World War II began. The key players were the Axis powers Germany, Italy, and Japan versus Allied powers USSR, Britain, France, and eventually the US. Germany divided up Poland and agreed not to go to war with the USSR. In Western Europe, Hitler's effective use of blitzkrieg, air raids to destroy, tanks to round up, and infantry to defeat the enemy and occupy the country, and clever field tactics won him France. The French government fled to Britain, Hitler's next target. Although Hitler tried to break Britain's resolve through nightly air raids and bombings under the new British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the British Royal Air Force fought hard, radar was used to track incoming bombers, and in the end Germany failed. Hitler turned his attention to Eastern Europe, attacking the Soviet Union, but due to harsh weather and lack of resources, the Nazis retreated after the Battle of Stalingrad. Also around this time was America's entry into the war. While in the war, America changed domestically. As most of the working male population was on a war, women were given jobs and opportunities they didn't have prior. This newfound freedom was short-lived, however, when the soldiers returned home and took back their place in the workforce. From the perspective of African Americans, they migrated in search of work but continued to face racism. With America at war with Japan, Japanese Americans were faced with heavy racism and were relocated to containment camps. Taken away from their jobs and homes, the Japanese Americans were faced with isolationism and had their freedoms taken away. American youth joined the army, blinded by dreams of valor and glory, but greeted with the cold, harsh reality of warfare. The soldiers that survived came back scarred. At first, the U.S. had remained isolated, focusing on domestic problems. However, when clearly the Allies needed help, the Lend-Lease Act was passed, and weapons and ammunition were exported to Britain. Furthermore, the U.S.'s oil embargo on Japan and unfair treatment of Japanese Americans acted as making the country far from neutral. For these reasons, Japan finally attacked Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. joined Allied powers and entered World War II. This was the turning point of the war. First, the U.S. and England attacked and regained Axis control to Africa, followed by the invasion of Italy. Rome was freed, and Italians revolted against Mussolini's dictatorship. The Allies continued to dominate Europe with air superiority, carpet bombing, and bringing German production to a halt. Then on D-Day, the single most massive invasion of history took place, ending with France once again under Allied control. The war in Europe was nearing its end, with the last major battle being the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last counterattack against the Allies, which too failed. With Russia coming in from the right and Britain, America, and France from the left, Germany surrendered. In the Pacific theater, Allied nations retook Japan-controlled territory an island at a time. Japan's capital, Tokyo, was firebombed, but the proud people refused to surrender. This forced the dropping of 2 atomic bombs on cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After the devastating damage, Japan unconditionally surrendered, finally ending the long and bloody war. Although the dropping of the atomic bomb ended the war, such an atrocious act of mass murder was not necessary. Perhaps it saved Allied lives and prevented a large bloodbath. It was at the expense of innocent Japanese civilians. The initial destruction, deaths due to radiation, as well as the creation of atomic bombs and the ever-present threat of nuclear catastrophe far outweighs the benefits. World War II was an event in history with short and long-term consequences. Europe and Japan were decimated, taking many years to rebuild. There was the Jewish Holocaust and the mass murder of hundreds of thousands of people, survivors now homeless and had nowhere to go. This forced the creation of the State of Israel, which would lead to conflicts in the Middle East. Differences between the two superpowers, America and USSR, would escalate into the Cold War. The establishment of the United Nations, a group of countries devoted to an alliance that would prevent further war, still exists and continues to strive for world peace. In the end, though, a heavy price was paid for such a small step forward. The people have seen, though, how desperate times may lead to extreme measures and beliefs. When forced to the edge, people become desperate, sometimes dragging down others to save themselves. The spread of fascism in response to the Great Depression, as well as the dropping of atomic bombs as a means to end the war, are proof of this. The hope is, though, that people of the world will learn from these events and not let the mistakes of the past repeat themselves in the ever applicable present world situations.